Okay, welcome back to what is episode 7 of Aginspire now, conversations with people doing inspiring things in agriculture. And I'm glad to be back on home soil today to talk to somebody who I've got to know very well over the last couple of years. A professor of ruminant nutrition, sheep production systems, heavily involved in research, a very practical person, and that is Professor Tommy Boland. Welcome, Tommy, and thank you very much for your time this morning.
No trouble, Tommy. Good to chat to you. And Tommy will do just fine. There's no need for the title.
Okay, I know, but it's hard to recognise the title there. Before, I suppose, what I've been doing with Tommy all along is looking at, you're involved in a huge amount of research in your role in UCD. You're an educator, a teacher, but also, I suppose, I want to look back at how people got to where they are now, and particularly your role. And it's quite a high-profile role. You're, as I said, heavily involved in research. But what's your journey been like in agriculture? If I could throw a stone out the road, I'd nearly hit your home place. You're from a farm in County Wexford. Tell us a little bit about, I suppose, your route, maybe early days, your involvement in agriculture, and you're somebody who speaks very passionately about agriculture. So, what's the background to give people some perspective, Tommy?
Yeah, I suppose, Tommy, I came from a fairly typical Irish farm. Back in the 1980s, we were a mixed farming enterprise, so there was a bit of tillage, and there was some vegetable production, potatoes predominantly. We milked cows and we had sheep, and over the years that farm evolved away from milking cows into suckling production, alongside beef production, or alongside sheep production. And I suppose tillage was always a small part on the farm to produce grain for the cattle and the sheep on the farm, and to use straw for bedding. So it was kind of it was an integrated system, I guess, all through. And, you know, some of my earliest memories would revolve around farming. Some of them good, some of them bad, I guess. You know, there's a friend of mine, and every time we get together, we lament about the history of picking stones. Yeah. There's some of the fields here on the home farm, and it'd probably be easier to pick the soil out of them than pick the stones out of them. We insisted on ploughing those fields for a number of years. Yeah, but agriculture has kind of been it's provided me with great opportunity, provided my family with great opportunity. It's provided many Irish families and sons and daughters of Irish farmers with great opportunity. And I think it'll continue to do that for a number of years to come. There's no doubt we're faced with challenges. There were challenges in the 80s and the 90s and the noughties, and there's challenges now, and they're new challenges in some ways, and they're similar challenges in many ways. But there's opportunity with those challenges as well. And I think, you know, if I go back and look at where I came from on the farm back in the 1980s, and I'm still lucky to live alongside my parents, the brothers farming at home now. Typical Irish story. The eldest son got the farm, the second son got the door. But I'm back living close to home. And, you know, as we've got married and had kids, I think that ability to live close to family is really, really important. And, you know, country living, no more than in the last 3 or 4 months when we've been under lockdown, it's a fabulous experience for children. And I can see now in my own children, some of the experiences I had and some of the, the adventures I had as a kid. They're starting to recreate those adventures now, and it's really, really good for them to live in the countryside. It's really, really good for them to have such close interaction with their cousins, their aunts and uncles, and their grandparents. Even though, again, that has been curtailed a little bit in recent times.
How many kiddies have you, Tommy?
Oh, well, I'd be prolific enough, Tommy. I guess 4 there, ranging from 8 years down to 8 months, and so no more than yourself. It's a busy household.
Yeah, it's fantastic though, and I suppose one of the things with you as well, Tommy, I know is you've done a bit of travelling in the recent past. You've gone to New Zealand. Did you bring the kids with you to New Zealand when you went?
Yeah, well, that's a bit of I want to be careful when I talk about this in my own house as well. I've a very, very tolerant wife. I
have one of those as well myself. Yeah.
Who supports me in some of my better notions. So I went to New Zealand for 3 months back in 2018. And I've been to New Zealand on a number of occasions now. I really like it out there. I really like the people. I really like the country, the scenery. And I suppose I really like the agriculture there. No more than ourselves to have challenges. Yeah, but I had an opportunity, which was funded by the School of Agriculture and Food Science in UCD, which I'm very quick to acknowledge, to travel out and work in Massey University on the North Island of New Zealand in 2018 for 3 months. And actually at the time, we had 3 kids. The youngest was, at that stage, was 2 years old.
Right.
And mad little devil, like, you know, he's the best in the world and he's great entertainment, but he's as mad as a bucket of frogs.
Right.
And there was a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old at the time. So my wife came out after 2 months with the eldest 2 kids, and the 2-year-old was, he went on his holidays to County Clare, to his grandparents in County Clare.
Okay.
You know, so I think he probably had the best adventure of all of us at that stage, and he certainly has a special place in the heart of his grandparents in County Clare. He has his own chair in the sitting room, he has his own seat at the table, he has his own bed. So he built a very special bond. But, you know, travel is hugely important, and my opinion of travel and my eyes have been open to travel over the years. I studied agricultural science in UCD, and I graduated in 2001. And as part of that program, we have professional work experience in 3rd year.
Yeah.
And there was an opportunity to go abroad and work experience. A number of my friends went to New Zealand, and others went to America and other places. But I didn't travel abroad. I had a very narrow focus at the time. I did most of my work experience in Arklow, there with Joe McGrath, just at the road from yourself.
I know Joe very well, yeah. One of the great statesmen of farming around this area, yeah.
Great guy, and I learned a huge amount from Joe, and you know, I don't think I'd have learned any more anywhere else. I might have learned different things, but I don't think I'd have learned any more. But I decided I couldn't travel internationally because I need to stay at home and play football with my club, Kyle Nairn. I suppose it's 20 years later now, and I'm still trying badly to play football with Kyle Nairn, but that same opportunity for international travel isn't there now, or at least it's not as easy to do. So since I turned up that opportunity back 20 years ago, I've been trying to sort of reclaim it. I think that's, you know, kind of thinking about when you look back over time, you know, what we do in education and working in UC, for that matter, presents you with great opportunities, but it's important to recognise those opportunities and grasp them as well. And I think that applies right across any facet of life.
Is that something that you would say that's very important? Because your role now as a teacher and educator, as well as the research work you do, is that something you would say to your students to go and experience different systems, different farms, with an open mind to learning and bringing back the best, and maybe recognising what you're doing well at home? Is that something you would advocate younger people to try and experience? I'm a bit like you. I probably came out of college in 2002, same alma mater, UCD. And, you know, I was mad to make a few bob. I was scrimping my way through college, and I started working straight away. And it's only in the last, my wife says I'm going through a midlife crisis. But anyway, it's only in the last couple of years that I've really, I suppose, was looking at an off-field scholarship, you know, from a perspective of agricultural travel, certainly. But it totally broadens your mind to meet different people. And I suppose in the Ireland, we're very much livestock production. You see the scale of different agricultural systems, be cropping or, you know, aquaculture, whatever it might be. It's great to get that traveling in and get that experience. Is that something you would advocate to students, Tom?
No, very much so. I think you will always learn something, no matter where you go. You will learn something. And sometimes that learning is that, okay, what we're doing here ourselves is you may be not too far off the mark. I don't think any system, any organisation, any country, any individual has all the answers. And I'd also be very cautious, or try to be cautious, and maybe if you talk to the students, they wouldn't agree with this, but I try to be cautious, not just to give them recipes, certainly give them the ingredients that are required to bake the cake, but maybe not give them the recipe. Okay. Because if you learn something off, rote learn it, and any of the variables change, then the recipe you have learned may become redundant. Whereas if you fully understand the system that you're working with, even if one input to that system or one part of the equation changes, your understanding will allow you to generate a response or come up with an answer. And by traveling, you know, internationally, I think you get to see different systems, you get to see different challenges, and you get to see how different people deal with those challenges. And you know, you learn more about people. I think that's probably the most important thing I've learned over my years, learning about people. And A, that not all people are like me, thankfully, and B, that not all people are the same. Yeah. And you can't take one approach to solve every problem. You can't take one approach to communicate with everybody. But travel is fantastic. Even if you didn't learn anything from a technical perspective, just to get around the world and see what's around the world. it's really curious. I'd be like, my parents are, you know, they're typical Irish farm family who were, I won't say exactly when they were born, but it wasn't today or yesterday. And they reared their family, you know, and we've all done reasonably well. But both my parents left school after national school. Not because they weren't able for it, but just the opportunity wasn't there for them. And, you know, in some ways, they would have a very different perspective on travel than I would. You know, my mother sees it as a terrible penance on me to have to go to New Zealand. You know, I'd be gone. I'd go to New Zealand every year, carbon footprint aside. If I could, and I'd travel as much as I can. But there's different perspectives in life, you know, so you can't, and when you're dealing with people and trying to, you know, in research and education and, you know, knowledge transfer, a lot of what we do is try to get a message across to people. You have to understand where they're coming from as well. So you have me and my generation, travel is fantastic. For my parents' generation, or some people from that generation, you know, travel, particularly somewhere like New Zealand, is a chore. And they would have seen people they grew up traveling to New Zealand and never coming home. You know, it was kind of a one-way ticket back then because the world was a much larger place than it is today. Yeah,
it's associated with that probably immigration and not that return. It's not like that return flight you can be back in. And I suppose, look, like today, I know we're not a million miles apart from each other, but I've been doing these Zoom calls with people in America, Holland last week. The world is a more connected place. Tom, so you went to UCD, you qualified in 2001, and your route back then into education and ultimately to become a professor in the last couple of years, what did that look like, or what was the decision tree there for you around? Did that happen by accident, or did you always see yourself back in that role of education and research?
No, I didn't. I suppose there's a few reasons which I might touch on why I didn't see myself in that role. Okay, so growing up, Tommy, I wanted to be a vet, I guess. That was the first point. Didn't have the intelligence to do it. So I ended up doing animal science in UCD instead. Perhaps at the time, before I went to UCD, I was thinking I wanted to do agribusiness. But went into animal science and, you know, really started to enjoy learning more and more about the mechanisms underpinning what I would have been growing up with in terms of dairy cows and sheep and beef cattle and pigs. And that sort of lit a fire in me, you know, for a quest for knowledge, which I think I still have today. And I'm always, you know, keen and interested to learn and to read and to try to understand what's going on. I think the easiest question to ask and the most difficult question to answer is why. You know, why does it happen? So once I started learning more about the biology of the animal, I was really keen to go in and try to learn more about that. So went through college. First year was great. Second year, you know, probably discovered the other joys that college life can offer as well, and maybe took my eye off the ball a little bit. I berate my own students now in second year for not turning up to lectures and stuff, but I probably was that soldier to some extent.
We all were those soldiers. I think that's an equally important part of education. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was looking at going to college, and I was having a chat with them, and I said, in front of their parents, I said, that's an equally important part of, now I mightn't be saying it to my own children, but it's an important part of your education, I think.
Yeah, I suppose to go on a little bit of a tangent for a moment, it's a challenge for our students now with the COVID-19 restrictions. You know, they don't get that same interaction with their classmates, and, you know, while Zoom is good, and that kind of virtual classroom is an option, you don't get the same interaction you do with your classmates. You know, some of the friendships you forge in university, they stay with you throughout life. I think when you're going to secondary school, you're friends with people because they're the people around to be friends with. When you get in, and some very good friendships in that as well. But when you get into university, you start to meet people with more common interests and commonalities with yourself. So hopefully we can get back to something approaching normal in the not too distant future on that front. So I went into, like I say, I studied animal science in third year then, did my work experience. So really, I was really interested in sheep production all along and the rumen and how the rumen worked. Got into fourth year, got on reasonably well in my exams in fourth year. And then the opportunity came up to do a PhD with Frank Crosby out in Lyons. And there was also an opportunity to do a PhD with Michael Diskin and Prof Boland in Athenry. But I suppose my first love, even though I really like the reproductive physiology side of things, my first love was with sheep production. And even though a particular topic in sheep production certainly wouldn't have been my first love, I decided to go for the PhD with Frank Crosby and Lyons, and that was on mineral nutrition. So went through that, finished up in 2005, I think. Spent a few months working with Frank Amara in Teagasc. He organised the International Grassland Congress. Spent a couple of weeks working in Teagasc in the advisory office down in Scorty, and then went straight on to staff in UCD studying or lecturing in grassland and forage production. And I suppose if there's two areas I really didn't that hugely engage with in college or didn't like, to be honest, one was mineral nutrition and second was grassland production. And I did my PhD in mineral nutrition, and I did my first job was in grassland production. So I think there's a running joke in the family here. There's a hardship gene in Bolands, and I think I was evidence of that.
But two very fundamental topics, and I think anybody who knows you now, and I think it goes back to that willingness to learn. I think you've such a broad range of knowledge across ruminant systems, Tommy. Now you can talk and be knowledgeable on most things. Just I suppose before we get on to maybe talk a little bit about cheap production systems and your current research, you did mention that learning thing, and that's a common theme that everyone I've talked to so far is still got, and the word that comes up all the time is curiosity. And I think it's an important trait, and I have it myself, and I've been, I suppose, trying to nourish it a little bit, but it is a bit like a bug when you get it, isn't it? Are you open-minded in that sense then, or do you tend to navigate towards what people who agree with you? Are you good for having that open mind to throw other perspectives in there and make sense of them?
Yeah, I think I'd certainly have an open mind. The way I'd see it, Tommy, is science is a journey, not a destination. You know, so you're learning all the time on that journey. You never really, at least I don't think I'll ever get to the point. Sorry, I'll rephrase. I knew it all when I started. You know, go back 20 years ago, I had all the answers to all the questions. No problem at all. And the longer I've been doing this job, the more I learn, the less I know. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah.
There's more questions all the time. And I think, you know, we live in a society nowadays where there's a real quest to be black and white and right and wrong. And, you know, particularly with biological systems, it's not that simple. You know, things are a spectrum rather than a switch. And trying to hit that right point along the spectrum that will allow your biological systems to work optimally. And, you know, I would be suspicious of somebody maybe who has exactly the same opinions or the same theories now as they had maybe 25 years ago, because there's so much new knowledge being generated. I think it's almost incumbent on us who are involved in education to kind of evolve with the new knowledge. Part of what we do in UCD and in any university is try to generate some of that new knowledge. But, you know, none of us have a monopoly on knowledge or you know, knowing what's right and knowing what's wrong. So you have to keep your eyes open. And there's a huge amount of information available to us all nowadays, and we all have smartphones. And I can be tethered to mine sometimes, which is something I try not to be. You have all this information at the touch of a button, but you can very easily fall into a trap on social media by following the people you agree with and only letting the people who agree with you follow you and only interacting with those. And you get into this big echo chamber group, think all the buzzwords and all the kind of terms you can use there. But if you don't challenge yourself and your own thinking, you'll very quickly lose contact and you'll very quickly lose relevance for a huge amount of people who you're trying to actually influence. Let that be consumers, let that be policymakers, let that be people who think that those of us involved in livestock production are the devil's spawn and are going to be the cause of the ruination of the world. You know, the worst thing you can do is say, oh, if somebody has such an outrageous attitude, I'll just ignore that. You have to firstly look at what that attitude is and then try to understand where that attitude is coming from. And you also need to understand you're not going to change everybody's mind and you can't get upset with that, but we need to be careful about hiding away in a bubble and only talking to people that agree with us, because it's not a great place to be. It's not a healthy space to be in, and I don't think it'll do any good for the industry we work in and that we're trying to support.
That's a really important point. It's something I try and do as well myself. That's something I wasn't great at doing, but at being open-minded and listening to people who have different views, completely different views, again, like you said, and try and understand them. Now, if it's kind of crazy stuff way out there, I mean, you've got to decipher that down, but you've got to listen to people. I think that's a really important point. Getting onto sheep production systems is something you've been worked at a number of years, and everyone has a moment in their career, Tommy, or moments that they can remember. And one of mine was, I got a phone call from Neil Keane, who was chairperson of the Agricultural Science Association at the time, great organisation. And he himself and yourself asked me, would I come up to UCD to talk about metabolic diseases in sheep pre-lambing? And of course I said yes, and a little bit of panic set in to the calibre of audience that I was going to talk to. I was presenting with yourself, Darren Carty, who I got to work with in the Farmers Journal too, of the top people in sheep in the country. And I remember I spent 2 months preparing for that lecture, and I learned some very valuable lessons. And Fiona Lovell was very good to me, actually. I got some great insights. And of course I appeared on the day like this was all in my head, but it was a huge step up for me as regards, I had started doing farmer meetings, and then there was this really highly qualified audience from the SA there that day. And I suppose that was the first sort of interactions myself and yourself had around sheep production, and I got through it. Maybe everyone didn't see the sweating that was going on before and during it, but I got through it. But you've been somebody that I've referenced many, many times in sheep production systems. I suppose, where have you seen us improve over the last decades? Where will sheep production systems be going in Ireland? Where are the opportunities? I know that they're big questions, but what are the key things maybe from your role from a research perspective? And I know you're very practical as well. You can get out in the ground and you can talk to farmers about practical, implementable stuff as well. What's the last decade look like, Tommy? What have we achieved, and maybe where are we going with our sheep production systems?
Yeah, that's there's a thesis in that there, Tommy, by itself, or many, and that's my way of starting off by saying I'm not really going to answer your question.
Some of the key things you would have picked up, Tom.
Yeah. No, listen, sheep production, if we look at how sheep production has evolved in Ireland over the last 30 to 40 years, and that'll start to tell a little bit of the story. We started off back in the late 70s, early 80s, and went through a period of rapid expansion in the sheep flock. And the flock more than doubled over the course of about 10 to 12 years. And that was a direct impact of a policy measure applied in another industry. So that was the direct impact of the milk quotas coming in, which limited expansion of the dairy herd. And sheep prices were pretty good at the time, and there was certainly very strong support payments for the sheep industry. And I could get myself in a lot of trouble now, but we keep going anyhow and see what happens.
Trouble is good.
It's good for you, Tommy, all right. It'll get you clicks. It'll and the very strong support payments. So the sheep flock went up to about 5 million breeding ewes. We're down to about half of that, a little more than half now at this stage, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8 million breeding ewes. And there's a number of reasons for that. Okay, if you look at the National Farm Survey data, the profitability on sheep farms is not good.
Okay.
It compares reasonably well to some of the beef enterprises. When you stack it up against the dairy and the tillage sector, it's the poor relation. But sheep serve other functions on farms as well. If you go back there to post-Celtic Tiger and the economic crash, we actually started to see sheep numbers going up and up in the country moderately, but it was kind of the crash post-Celtic Tiger that arrested the decline in the national breeding flock. And that's because young people who had been working off farm were going back onto farm, they had a few acres there, they're looking for something to generate a bit of income. Sheep are attractive in that regard because they're a low entry point in terms of cost. You pick up a few breeding ewes reasonably cheaply, or lambs, hoggets, and in a very short space of time you'll have a product to sell from them. And lamb price has been pretty good over the last 6, 7, 8 years. 1 year with the next. So there's a little bit of money flowing through there. In theory, we have about 36,000 sheep farmers in Ireland. You know, about 2/3 of those farms are less than 100 ewes, which, you know, you have challenges from a scale point of view there. And you have some of the bigger operations who are doing really, really well and doing really, really good things. What progress have we made in the sheep industry over the last 10 years? I think there's been more of a focus has been placed on, you know, breeding animals for profitability. And this is an area that I suppose get quite exercised about in some of my lectures and in some of my chats with farmers as well. On sheep farms, we have one product. On Irish sheep farms, we have one product, and that's lambs. And that's the number of lambs we have to sell. If we take the industry as a whole, you know, the number of lambs born per ewe has been reasonably or almost entirely static for the last 50 to 60 years. Now, an average, I'd say, is probably the most useless statistic anyone can produce because it hides a multitude. There have been farms out there who are doing really, and farmers doing really, really good work in terms of pushing up the prolificacy of the sheep flock, and as a result, pushing up the number of lambs they have sold. So you can, that 36,000 sheep farmers, there's, again, going back to the spectrum I mentioned there, they're split across the spectrum. You have some people, and the sheep are just a hobby, and I'm one of those people. I have a problem where I have a few sheep, and it's a hobby. No, it's probably the worst thing I could be doing is trying to farm a few sheep when I'm telling other people how to farm sheep.
A cobbler would hold his own shoes or something like that, Tommy, is it?
I don't know, I wouldn't go that far now, Tommy. But it's, you know, it keeps me grounded, let's say. It keeps me grounded. And then you have the large flocks who are doing a very good job on prolificacy. But, you know, you go out and talk to farmers, and again, every farmer has got to where they are by following their own path. You know, and who might come in and say that they're right or they're wrong, or who are you to come in and say that they're right or they're wrong. And many have done well, and you know, when you have kids, you start to see yourself, your priorities change, and the major priority becomes looking after your kids and giving them a good start in life. And you know, the sheep farm population is probably slightly older in terms of its demographic than some of the other sectors, but these sheep farms have reared their families and educated their families, so you know, done good things. But I'd be going out and I'd be talking about prolificacy, and you know, you get all triplets stuff. Just don't want triplets. You know, I'd sooner see a ewe having one lamb than having 3 lambs. And I said earlier, there's very few things I'm sure about anymore. The only one thing that will never happen is one lamb will never turn into 2 lambs. So if she has one lamb, the ewe has one lamb, the most she's going to sell is one lamb off that ewe. If she has triplets, you know, you should be selling 3 for the majority of them. You'll sell 2 for any that you don't sell 3 for. So while there's been progress there on individual farms, I suppose at a national level, the lack of progress in average litter size has been somewhat disappointing. The other thing I would say about sheep farming, you know, if you don't have good fencing with sheep, you won't have good neighbours. And if you don't have good handling facilities, you won't have a good back. You know, and a lot of sheep farms, they don't have those 2 things. And, you know, sheep farming becomes a real chore then if you don't have the infrastructure to allow you to do it. So the better farms, and use the better in a broad context, you know, they have invested in facilities and invested in fencing infrastructure, which has allowed them to better manage their farms and place more of a focus on maximising the utilisation of grass and grassland and forages. And I'd be very strong on this with sheep farmers and sheep farming and ruminant production in general. You know, these are species that have evolved to utilise resources, you know, carbohydrates that humans and other species cannot utilise. You know, so we need to maximise the contribution of those forages in the diets of ruminants in general and sheep in particular. And if you look at the national kind of development in the sheep industry, more and more of our sheep are moving to the hills now. About 50% of the flock are located in the more mountainous regions along the west coast. You know, that's where they're utilising that forage resource and on land that's not suitable for cropping in any way really, to produce a very high value product for human consumption. And that's a merit, or that's a value of ruminant livestock, which I think is sometimes often overlooked.
I think I want to get back to you at the end on that maybe again, but just from the sheep production point of view, you have a common interest with me, and that is our fascination maybe with colostrum and its value in ruminant production systems. And there's few things you can do. I mean, we talk about milking out the dairy cow and that, but in a sheep production system, feeding the ewe pre-lambing is one of the, I've heard you give this tip to myself and other people. Feeding the ewe pre-lambing to ensure good quality colostrum. Look, she has some genetics to produce the milk, but that step alone can have such an impact on the lamb performance and health from the very start go, from a perspective of immunity, from an energy perspective, and especially if you're going up in prolificacy. It's one of the things I think was kind of so simple but mind-blowing for me in beef and sheep systems, is that's what we can do. We can feed our ewe to maximize colostrum quality. Now, I know you've done research in this area where you've looked at that. Can you just talk to me a little bit about that, about the practical approach maybe? If I'm a sheep farmer and I wanted to focus in on an area, particularly around lambing, I think feeding the ewe for a number of metabolic reasons, but just maybe on the colostrum part, is such a good thing to focus on.
Yeah, and I suppose it's, you can go to deep into the science on this, and then you need to pull it back to the practical level. And I guess, again, when I started talking to farmers, I was going too deep into the science and I wasn't looking enough at the practical side. There's a few practical things you need to know to feed your sheep well. I'll focus on to feed your sheep well, to feed them in late pregnancy. And, if I was to list 3 or 4 of those, you need to know when your ewes are lambing. Okay, and there's a really cheap technology out there which is called rattling the rams. And we've done some survey work with sheep farms. You'd be surprised how many sheep farms don't actually rattle the rams. So you can't tell accurately when they're going to lamb down. If you don't rattle the rams, write down on the calendar or write down in the diary the date the rams go in with the ewes. And about 75 to 80% of them will go and lamb within 70 days of going out with the ram. So you count forward your 21 weeks, and that'll tell you when your lambs are going to be born, and you start feeding according to that calendar then. So that's, you need to know when they're lambing. You need to know how many lambs they're carrying. And again, not enough of our sheep farmers are probably scanning. It has got better with sheep welfare scheme. So know how many lambs they're carrying, know the size of the ewe, how heavy she is, and what you'd see again, I would question how many sheep farmers actually ever weigh you, so how do you know? You guess, and when we guess what weight our ewes are, we underestimate it. All the time would be my experience in that, yeah. Yeah. So you might say she's 70, but she's probably closer to 90. If she's a Suffolk cross, she's probably pushing that 90. She's more likely to be pushing the 90 mark than she's pushing the 70 mark. And then the 4th one is forage quality. And again, I think if there's one thing any farmer with an overwinter house feeding program should spend money on, it's testing their forage. It's €35 to get a good analysis of your forage, and it's the cheapest money you will ever spend. I think it'll work out about 100 kilo of concentrate feed. You wouldn't see it over 100 ewe flock. It's 1 day's feeding pretty much in late pregnancy. It's a thing or not, but too many of us don't do it. And when we don't do it, we guess the quality. And you probably get these queries from farms and from advisors, etc. Ewes didn't milk down, didn't lamb, no colostrum. And you start asking the questions, and I'd say, what's the forage like? Oh, it's good. Did you get it tested? No. So how do you know it's good? Oh, well, no, it's good. So when we actually go out and test forages and we look at the quality, is like everything else, there's a bell curve. You have your good, your bad, and your in between. However, any farmer I've ever been contacted by that has a problem, they've only had good forage in their opinion. So if we don't test our forage, we overestimate the quality of it. And if you combine overestimated forage quality with underestimated your weight, you end up underfeeding your ewes. So the first thing you need to get right is to know your demand And that's by knowing when your ewes are lambing, many lambs to carry, how heavy the ewes are, and that'll allow you to budget your feeding accurately. And it sounds complicated there, but once you know those 2 or 3 pieces of information, it's really quite simple to feed those ewes. In terms of how we feed them then, energy and protein are really, really important. Energy, and I've spent a lot of time talking about this. We have 2 sources of energy for the ewe. We have energy in the feed, we feed them, and the ewe has her own energy reserve on her back. Now, my preference is, and this is what I'd say when I'm talking to farmers or students, is that energy on the ewe's back, that fat reserve that she has, that's money in the bank. And that allows the farmer to borrow from that bank at times of peak demand, or more accurately, it allows the ewe to borrow from that bank at times of peak demand. The peak energy demand in the ewe is in early lactation. You know, from the point the ewe lambs down, if you take a twin-bearing ewe, Tommy, I'm sorry, I'm probably getting too much into detail. So
no, you're good. It's really important stuff, Doug. And it's not complicated, as maybe because I understand it, but it's the fundamentals of that good management. And we get caught a lot of times feeding stuff that we don't need to feed to bridge a gap. But to clearly understand those couple of steps are important. So keep going, Tom.
Yeah, so if you take a twin-bearing ewe, from the point she lambs, she'll have an energy demand. I'm going to use megajoules and metabolizable energy. She'll have an energy demand of somewhere between 18 and 20 megajoules per day. The number doesn't matter, so don't worry about the number. By the time she hits peak milk production, 3 weeks later, so over the course of 3 weeks, her energy demand more or less doubles. You know, for her to feed those 2 lambs at a rate that will give you good lamb weaning weights, her energy demand more or less doubles. She won't, in most cases, she won't be able to meet that energy demand from grass intake or even from nitrogen intake of any type unless you go for a very high concentrate diet. So she needs to borrow from that bank of fat that she has on her back. So I do not like to see that energy reserve being mobilized in late pregnancy. I prefer to feed the ewe to meet her energy requirements in late pregnancy, to hold that bank of fat or hold that bank of energy until the point she lambs down, and then she can start to utilize that energy in early lactation. And in our systems, predominantly in Irish systems, the ewes are turned out to grass in springtime, you know, almost immediately after lambing. In some cases they don't, but the majority do turn out immediately after lambing. And in most cases, that grass is high in protein. And by having that bank of energy reserve, the ewe can actually make better use of that high protein content in the grass. So not only is the bank of energy supporting her energy demand, it's also allowing her to capture more of the protein. You know, so it's a lots of facts and figures there. To sum it up, have the ewe lambing down in the body condition score of around 3 to 3.25, and then use that body condition post lambing to produce the milk to support those lambs. And it's really important, it's probably much more important in a wet spring than a dry spring. We had a fantastic dry spring here this year in Ireland. You know, it ran into problems in May with reduced grass supply, but that dry grass in springtime, it was fantastic for sheep. And Frank Campion, who's now working in Athenry as a sheep researcher, he did a PhD with me in Line a few years ago. And Frank's work would show that, you know, when grass is wet in springtime, it can reduce the dry matter intake of the ewe by as much as 33%. Wow. You know, so when we looked at the spectrum of dry matter content in the grasses we fed, from the driest grass to the wettest grass, daily dry matter intake was reduced by as much as 33%. So her energy intake was reduced by that much. And if you have a prolonged wet spring, the ewe needs that energy reserve to allow her to milk to support those lambs. And coming back to the point I made about the lamb being the only product we sell, you know, if we can get those lambs to good weaning weights, we'll get them off the farm quicker and we'll finish them with a lower feed input, let that be grass or any other type of feed.
And that energy and protein is critical as she bags up in her udder to produce that colostrum as well, which is going to be the rocket fuel from all perspectives, from immunity, from energy, fat, the whole lot for that lamb. So it's just, and I think the key thing is that idea that we're going in to measure, Tommy, that we're measuring the fat on the yoke by putting hands on it. It seems like laboursome work, but I think in sheep systems, it's where the added yards are got, it's where the profitability is got from that time, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't really buy into the fact that it has extra work, Tommy. You know, if you're scanning your ewes there at your mid-pregnancy, So the objective is to keep what you have in mid-pregnancy into late lactation, or sorry, into late pregnancy and early lactation. The farmers, they are pushing the ewes up onto the trailer for the scanner to scan them. So you're putting your hand basically on every sheep going onto the trailer. Now, you don't need to get too concerned as, oh, geez, is she a 2.5 or a 2.75? You just need to pick out the thin ones and maybe give them a little bit of preferential treatment, even though it's very difficult to do anything from mid-pregnancy onwards. And then you identify the heavier ones. The same, you'll be giving your booster clostridial vaccinations 4 to 6 weeks before the lamb down. Again, you're in the race with them doing that. We can't do it remotely yet, so you have to be there with the sheep putting your hand on them. So that's another opportunity. So, I'm not saying that farmers need to go out into the fields and herd up the sheep and bring them into the yard just to body conditions for them, but you tie in your body conditions for them with the other activities you do as part of the routine management of the flock anyway. And what I didn't touch on around the nutrition piece was protein. Protein in late pregnancy is really, really critical, particularly in the last month or so of pregnancy. And we need to not make a mess of our protein nutrition, because if we don't get the protein nutrition right, then ewes will lamb down with insufficient colostrum, and the quality of that colostrum will be poor as well. And if you want to have a hard time at lambing, and if you want to sicken yourself with sheep, have ewes lambing down without colostrum.
It's been a very common issue in the last 3 or 4 years.
It is, and there's probably at farm level there's a number of different causes for it, Tommy. It may not all be linked to just poor protein nutrition, or even underfeeding in some cases, overfeeding in some cases, or health issues. It can be something very practical, like a lack of feed space. So there's lots of reasons for it, but when it happens, it's an absolute heartbreak at farm level, because it massively increases your workload. And Cathy Dwyer from SRUC, she produced a paper there a number of years ago, and she does some excellent work on lamb welfare and lamb mortality. And of all the challenges that she lists, which were a multitude that are faced by the lamb when it's born, they essentially can all be dealt with by having a good supply of good quality colostrum available to the lamb at birth, and that the lamb can access that colostrum. And I go back, actually I really need to be more selective when I answer the phone to you, Tommy. I think I go back to lambing live in lines in 2019.
That's when we worked together. I was with Journal. We did a day on the sheep farm. We came from the UCD shed with Stephen and the guys and yourself, and there's a whole range of people on that show that day. And it was actually great fun. And all the team in the Journal were with me that day. We had a great day. But we looked at so many issues, still on the Journal website, all that video footage. But you were talking about colostrum quality that day as well, weren't you?
Yeah, and that's like, it was a fantastic day, but God damn it, I'd never do it again. Because there was a shed load of work. I'm half joking there. There was a shed load of work went into that, but I think it was a really good day, and we got really good content. But one thing that we got a lot of feedback from today was, the trip to Joe's, which were lambing down, and the lambs were 5 kilos, average 5 kilos per day, and the ewes had loads of colostrum. We got lots of feedback coming in from farmers who were quite surprised by that, and couldn't understand how we could have big lambs and colostrum at the same time. And there was a job of work, and I'm responsible, and you're responsible, and anybody who's dealing with farmers have a responsibility here to try get that message out. We have the technology, we have the knowledge here, and we just need to we need to come up with ways of better. I mean, we as an industry come up with ways of better transferring that technology onto farmers. And you mentioned there I'm involved in research, and I sometimes think, don't say it out loud too often, probably shouldn't be saying it on a public forum like this. If we focused on getting the knowledge we currently have out onto farm, rather than generating new knowledge to bring out onto farm, we could actually make a huge amount of gains in any individual industry. Now, it doesn't work like that. That's a very simplistic view to take. There's a whole science in knowledge transfer as much as there's a science in the generation of that knowledge.
Tommy, you're also involved, and I've just two quick areas to finish off with, and it's apologies to be a quick area, but you know, on all public farming forums, discussions at a broad level, there's discussions around regenerative agriculture, and there's particularly a lot of discussion around mixed species swards in grazing systems. And you're currently, through the Smart Sward project, along with others, involved in research in UCD around the impact or management of mixed species swards in sheep production systems, and I know in cattle as well. The good, the bad, and the challenging may be there. Can you just outline for people a little bit about what Smart Sward is? Because it's a topic that's very, very sexy at the moment anyway, is mixed species swards. I got very excited about it many years ago when I heard about it first, but I think the more I learn about it, I'm cautiously optimistic around it because it's complicated. Do you want to tell people about Smart Sward?
Yeah, well, it's complex and complicated. I suppose I'm very lucky to be involved in this research area, I think, and it's an area that has been driven in UCD by Dr. Helen Sheridan, who's been working on this for a number of years, and I was lucky enough to get involved with Helen's project Smartgrass. And I think we probably did some of the first work in Ireland looking at the impact of multi-species swards on animal performance. And, you know, to summarise quickly, when we fed a multi-species sward, and in this case it was a combination of grasses, legumes and herbs, the animals outperformed animals grazing a ryegrass only sward or a ryegrass white clover sward. And all the swards were fresh reseeds. And, you know, how was that performance manifest? Well, the lambs grew faster up to the first 5 to 6 weeks of age. That can only mean one thing in sheep, that those lambs are getting more milk or better quality milk. So they were getting more nutrition from the ewe directly. Those lambs continue to grow faster until weaning, and those lambs are finished earlier. They're finished 2 weeks earlier, you know, which may, okay, doesn't sound like a lot, but over a flock of sheep, it's quite a lot. And I think for me, the most exciting result from that particular study, was that the amount of anthelmintic, or the amount of wormer we needed to use to control parasites in the stomach of the sheep, was reduced by 50%. And I know me and you have had this conversation previously. You know, I see the anthelmintic resistance as being a big challenge at farm level, on sheep farms and on beef farms as well. So we need to come up with alternative control strategies. As much as I like the sheep and sheep industry, you know, we need to do this work in beef. So we've started that now, and that's where the Smart Sward project arose from. It was to, you know, go into more detail on the potential of multi-species swards in both dairy systems and beef systems, and beef-only systems, and beef and sheep co-grazing together. And as you said, there's a huge interest in it out there. The initial results were just, this is our first year grazing in that Smart Sward project. The initial results are looking good. You know, the animal performance is stacking up really well for the multi-species swards. But it's too early to be drawn any conclusions for that, or for beef cattle or for dairy cattle just yet. So that's the good. You know, and there's no such thing as a free lunch in life, and you know, there's nothing, as I said earlier, is all right or nothing is all wrong. There are challenges with multi-species swards as well. The two biggest challenges I would see with them, and there are a number of challenges, but the two biggest challenges I would see is A, the persistence of the plant, and B, is the weed control within the swards. And in Ireland and in the European Union, if we deal with the weed control first, we have no herbicide that we can apply to a multi-species sward which contains things like plantain and chicory. At least we don't have one which I'm aware of, that will kill something like a dock or ragwort or a thistle and leave the plantain and the chicory intact. So if it kills the dock, it'll kill the plantain and the chicory. So that's the first challenge, is how to control weeds, if that's a desire at farm level, and it is at some farms to control the weeds in the sward. And the second is the persistency of these plants in the sward. One of the reasons why I went to New Zealand a few years ago was to work with Paul Kenyon and Peter Kemp and Steve Morris and their group in Massey University, who've done a lot of work on herb and legume swards for finishing lambs and for finishing beef cattle from the dairy herd. And in their systems, they don't include ryegrass or don't include grass of any type in the sward. So it's just a legume and herb mix. And that allows you to completely change how you manage those swards. And that gives those systems a much better level of persistency than what we have been seeing in Ireland so far. When we combine, and again, probably I apologise for getting into too much of the technical detail, but when we combine these herbs with perennial ryegrass does really, really well when it's grazed down to 4 centimetres. Legumes, to a lesser extent, but particularly chicory and plantain, do not do well when they're continually grazed down to 4 centimetres. So that's going to be a challenge for us here in Ireland, is trying to strike the right balance between having well-managed perennial ryegrass in the sward and persistent herbs in the sward. And, you know, again, I need to be cautious, I suppose, maybe in what I say, but some of the thoughts that go through my head is like, you know, we need to look at some of these swards with no grass in them and see how to perform and actually start to manage them, you know, to a post-grazing sward height of 10 centimetres. That's
very high, yeah.
Yeah. And we're doing some of the studies we're doing. Now we are sort of, you know, going into higher pre-grazing herbage mass and coming out at higher post-grazing sward heights, and you know we're still seeing the big benefits in terms of animal performance, but and it's very early stages. But it would be interesting to see how the herbs actually survive in those swards over time. I think the other thing we need to be conscious of in terms of the multi-species sward, like I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited about it from an industry perspective. I'm really excited about it from a research perspective. I sowed some of these swards on my own land a number of years ago, and you know, it was a bit of a discussion point amongst the neighbours anyhow. And you know, I got plenty of comments. Oh, geez, you have a great crop of docks there, and all this crack.
They can look like a field of weeds to all intents and purposes if you're not familiar with them.
Yeah, but what's a weed, Tommy? A weed is a plant in the wrong place.
Okay, yeah. Okay, fair point.
You know, so we maybe need to change our thought process a little bit on what the weed is. But no, the point I was trying to make there in a long-winded way is, you know, the potential for penetration of multi-species swards, we need to be sort of realistic about this as well. If we look at the reseeding rates nationally each year, is it, you know, 4 or 5% being reseeded? You know, how many farms or how many fields have never been reseeded in a lifetime? You know, I think, you know, we're probably seeing a lot of the same farms reseeding continually, you know, in a 10, 12-year cycle perhaps. So the potential for multi-species swards to actually penetrate at national level, we need to be realistic about what that actually is. But the response to multi-species swards, I think, has been as interesting as the benefits of multi-species swards. And you know, again, you see this through social media, and I go out and talk to farmers and discussion groups, and you know, the responses you get are really, really interesting. You know, some people say this is fantastic. We should all be sowing multi-species swards now, and as the way forward. And the other is, you're telling us to sow weeds, like, you know, what are you doing? Is this what you're getting paid for in UCD, to tell farmers with good clean swards to plough them up and fill them up with weeds? And there's all sorts of reasons for that. Some people are very committed and tied into their current system, and it's working really, really well for them. And some people are looking for a new avenue and a new direction, and they're really, really keen to follow that, and they're very positive. The truth is probably somewhere between the two. And we just need to, I think we need to be realistic of our expectations of what the multi-species swards can deliver. But I think there is huge potential in multi-species swards. And the final thing I'll say about it now is that we use multi-species swards as an umbrella term. You know, it's not a single entity. You know, you can look at the different plants that go into the mix and the different ratios of those plants that go into the mix. So when we kind of say multi-species swards as an umbrella term, it's a very broad church of what can actually be sown at farm level.
And there's a huge amount of science to it, Tommy. I think people who want to follow that story can follow it online. I know Smart Sward have a Twitter profile. You keep it up to date, and all the people involved in the project keep it up to date. And I think there's a synergy with Heartland's project there as well, isn't there? And I met Gary Spence there, who's doing great work, and that team. So I think, look, it's that's what research is about. It's around finding what works, what doesn't work, and the integration of that knowledge into existing systems. But I think it's important research. Tommy, you're often, I often see you speaking on sort of agriculture's role, Irish agriculture's role in the coming decades, from a point of view maybe of an environmental perspective. There's whole socio-economic reasons why agriculture is important in this country. Just talk to me a little bit about what maybe your thoughts are on what we need to do over the next decade. You mentioned about consumers at the very start. Are we doing enough to engage? I think one of the great pictures I saw online over the last 3 years was in UCD Lyons Farm, you had the amount of grass and meal to produce a kilo of lamb. It was an extraordinary feat. You can talk a little bit about that, but maybe, you know, you talk a lot about maybe agriculture's role in the future. Do you want to maybe talk about some of your ideas around how that's going to evolve, and what that's going to look like, and where maybe some of the challenges are for us, but equally so opportunities?
Yeah, well, I think there are a number of challenges. You know, you have the challenge of the the environmental challenge. You know, and people think when we talk about environment, we mean greenhouse gases. There are probably more pressing challenges, believe it or not, at a national level for agriculture than greenhouse gases. We have the challenge from the nitrates directive and nitrate loss to the environment. We have the biodiversity challenge. And, you know, and going back 10 years ago, I personally wouldn't have been thinking about biodiversity, but it's one of the benefits of working in an organisation like UCD with the multitude of expertise that exists within the school, that you can chat to people like Helen Sheridan and Ola Schmidt and Barry McMahon and learn more about these biodiversity challenges. We have the term social license, you know, the challenge around social license, and you know, that was really manifest for me very clearly in the last week. There was a New Zealand farmer who won an award for Share Milker of the Year, I think perhaps, and the award was subsequently revoked on the back of tweets that individual had made 3 to 4 years previously. You know, and it painted the wrong picture of dairy production in New Zealand. So there's a huge pressure coming down from social license, from animal welfare perspectives, from consumer preference, you know, consumer demand. Now, I think that one might be overplayed a little bit. It's a very vocal minority, but I believe it is a minority. Perhaps I shouldn't say believe. The evidence would suggest that the moment beliefs really belong in church rather than science. The evidence would suggest at the moment that it's a vocal minority rather than a growing majority. So the challenges are many, and there will be new challenges which will arise, you know, which are not even on a horizon at the moment. One thing that gave me some reassurance was you know, during the lockdown there was a return to some extent, at least anecdotally, to, you know, people going out and buying the Sunday roast. You know, red meat sales held up very strongly, if not increased. If you were to believe some of the projections prior to that, you know, I read one report recently that by 2035, the US dairy and beef industries would essentially be gone.
I read that same report. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wouldn't give it too much credence, and perhaps I shouldn't be repeating. But that's the type of you know.
Well, that's the kind of language that's sort of up against livestock production as well. I mean, it's back to the point that you can't ignore sort of these conversations and at least be armed with the science to recoup and say why this wouldn't be the case. And I think that's the key thing there for me, anyway. Yeah,
there's a range of challenges there. You know, we have to get better at communicating, and you know, I'm sometimes concerned that it's become the responsibility of the individual farmer to do this communication. You know, that the farmer needs to tell their story, and you know, some will and some do a really excellent job of it, but many are not comfortable with it. You know, to be a farmer nowadays, you have to be expert in so many different areas. It's not just in, you know, husbandry any longer, you know, or soil science. You're an accountant, you're an auditor, you're a compliance officer, you're an animal health and welfare officer. You know, the farming piece is nearly becoming smaller and smaller all the time. And now we might be getting guilty of telling our farmers they have to become their own promotion body as well. But there is a need to communicate better with customers and consumers about the merits of agriculture and about the merits of animal agriculture. But while we're doing that, we cannot pretend, you know, that no more than any other industry, that every farmer is top notch. and that no farmers do anything wrong. And it only takes, and Paddy Wall made this point at one of our sessions in Lambing Live 2019. You know, it only takes a few bad apples to pull down the image and to pull down the reputation of all farmers. And while it's a natural response for any group to defend their members, we need to be willing to call out poor practice and bad management. And that will give much more credibility, I feel, to people who are doing a good job and who are doing the right thing. And the vast majority of farmers are doing the right thing. I was going through New Ross a couple of weeks ago, heading out to your part of the country, Tommy, down in Kerry, and I was held up, just coming to Clonroach. I was held up on the way into Clonroach, and the guards were up ahead, and there was a van right in front of us, couldn't really see what was happening. And there was queues of tractors with trailer loads of plastic being brought into the recycling centre there. You know, farmers bringing in bale wraps and used silage covers to be recycled. The farmers have paid a levy at the purchase of that plastic, and now they're paying to get it to be recycled. And that's an example of a massive uptake by farmers to do the right thing. These plastics are not being burnt at farm level any longer. They're not appearing in hedgerows and ditches and waterways. You know, so the majority of farmers do try and are very committed to the environment, but we can't believe that there are not a very small minority of poor performers out there as well, which need to be held to account and called to task on that. The opportunities then to go to the other side, and this is a point people who have heard me speak more than once are probably tired of hearing me saying it now again. The big contribution of ruminant animals to global society is the fact that they take a food source or a carbohydrate source or a biomass source which is not available for human consumption and convert it into a product which is not only available but actually a very high quality nutrient source for humans. So ruminants take cellulose and grass and convert it into meat and milk, and as well as supplying protein, it supplies a number of micronutrients which are really important for normal, healthy bodily function. And a lot of the land, and again, not all of the land is used to support livestock, but a lot of it can't be efficiently used for cropping. So if we're not using it to produce red meat, then it's not being used to produce food. And that's a really important contribution of ruminant livestock to the global food supply situation. We have then, the challenge that brings with ruminant, and it's methane production. And methane production has become a really popular stick to beat livestock production with and ruminant livestock production with. And I know you had Frank Misner speaking in recent weeks on this, and he can speak much more eloquently about it than I can. But this science is moving along in this area as well. To show that methane is part of a cycle. And when you look at fossil fuel emissions to the atmosphere, that is not new carbon coming into the atmosphere, but it's carbon which has been locked up for millions and millions of years. Whereas the methane that a cow emits today was 6 months ago, that was carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which was, or much more recent than that, that was carbon dioxide which was in the atmosphere, which was drawn down into the plant through the process of photosynthesis. So the methane from a cow is part of the cycle, whereas carbon dioxide from fossil fuel, it's carbon which has been locked up in a reservoir for millions of years. So that's essentially serving as new carbon in the atmosphere today.
So Tommy, I mean, I think it's just about, and that's why it's so important to have people like yourself who are doing research, that we are tackling this with science. Science doesn't always get the credence, and it's not as cool as sort of uninformed opinion sometimes, but it is so important that we base the next decades on science, and that's down to research and well thought out and well well research as well, and I think that's a key role. And what I do, and I always enjoy our conversations, is you have that practicality as well, which can be sometimes not always there when you're so heavily involved in research. You're able to bring down to a practical level. And I love your tips for the sheep farmer there around knowing your dates for lambing, scanning to know your parity, feeding and body condition, and basing that around those key points. Tommy, I suppose just to leave us with some thoughts, some of maybe your lessons. I know you're a teacher and educator now, as we said a few times, but what are the key messages you'd want to get out to young people involved in agriculture, maybe that are at a stage behind us now? We're not as young as we probably think we are. I know you're still playing a bit of football, and I still think I'm a lot younger than I am, but the next generation coming through in agriculture, what are some of the key messages that you would say to them of encouragement, and sort of some of the inspiring lessons you've learned along the way, I suppose, to sum up?
Yeah, well, I suppose anytime I want a reminder, Tommy, I'm not as young as I used to be. I go down to the football field to train, and it really struck home 2 years ago now, before I went to New Zealand. I was coming on to play the last couple of minutes of a match against our old rivals, Castletown. And there's 3 subs brought on at the same time, and I looked to the left and I looked to the right, and I added up the combined age of the other 2 subs, and it didn't match my age. Perspective of what I was at. So what would I say to the new generation? Like, the possibilities are endless. You know, it's a fantastic time to be getting involved in agriculture, to be getting involved in the agri-food industry. No matter what paper you open, what website you log on to, what radio station you turn on, we hear about the challenge of feeding the growing global population. You know, so, and that's agricultural production. At this stage, you know, food is predominantly produced in agricultural production, a bit of agriculture and fisheries, etc., and what's predominantly coming from agricultural production. So there's huge scope there. You know, don't limit yourself. As a young person, I would say, and I would have been guilty of this myself, 20 years ago, you'd say, oh, geez, maybe I can't do that, or maybe that's not for me. You know, don't limit yourself. Don't put any boundaries around what you think you're capable of. People are capable of so much more than they actually believe in many cases. You know, we all see that. We get thrown into a new challenge in work, or, you know, if you look back to what you were doing 10 years ago and compare it to now, you know, I certainly know I was probably at nothing 10 years ago compared to what I'm doing today. And, you know, you can grow and you can grow and you can grow and you can build into anything. So this young people have huge production, huge potential. You know, and I look at some of the people going through agriculture and agricultural science in UCD, and to be honest with you, you know, there's some of them who probably shouldn't be there because maybe they don't really want to be there. Going to college is the thing to do. It's not, I'm not suggesting for a second that, you know, that those kids won't excel in life and they won't do probably much better than many of us have. You know, but university isn't maybe necessary to be all and end all for everybody. But you look at what some of them are achieving and the workload some of them carry, and, you know, the results they generate, and it's really impressive, and you'd be envious of what they can do. And that's the beauty of youth. You know, you have huge potential, and, you know, the body is very resilient at that stage, and, you know, you can do a lot and you don't need much sleep, and you can act the maggot a bit and still deliver the results. Listen to everybody you encounter, you know, but then you need to decipher what they're telling you, and that can be tricky at times. You know, so anybody who's good enough and kind enough to offer you the time to give some advice, you know, listen and analyze that. You know, you don't need to follow it all, but take on board what you hear and be yourself. You know, I heard someone recently, you need to be yourself. It's a quote, I'm not sure who had it, maybe Oscar Wilde, be yourself, everybody else is taken. You know, so don't try to replicate what you see somebody else doing. Forge your own path. Don't be afraid to take an odd risk, but don't be reckless at the same time. And finally, in this era of social media, be very careful what you put online. Doesn't matter whether you're in the ag industry or anything else. I'm certainly glad there wasn't Snapchat and Twitter and Facebook when I was going through UCD many moons ago.
I echo those. I think I would be haunted at this stage if there was. Tommy, they're very wise words. I like the self-belief piece. I do like the growth piece. If I look back 10 years ago where I was, started treading water a little bit, and I took the leap into trying to learn a bit, push myself a bit. Lots of mistakes along the way. And certainly the easiest person I think you can be is yourself. And it takes a bit of figuring out and time to do that. Tommy, thank you so much for your time. People can follow you on social media under, I'll have it in the blog, but just tell people where they can keep up to date with the research you're doing, certainly from that perspective.
Yeah, so we have a Twitter account for the Smart Sward project at SmartSward1, and then I do a good bit of tweeting about research in general, and you know, some of the other nonsense that comes out of me on my own Twitter account at Pallas, PALLAS TV. You know, so there's if people really want me, they'll find me there, but I'm not sure they should spend much time looking.
No, Tommy, it's been fantastic to talk to you. Really want you to keep up the great work. Keep the practicality. You've had some beautiful one-liners in there as well. It's one of the things I think you have a great way of summing up things just from that practical approach, but you have that such in-depth passion for science and that knowledge as well. So continued success. Thanks again. So this is the second time I've called on you, lambing live now, Aginspire. God only knows what the third thing will be, Tommy. Or you can always block me on the phone. It might be third time lucky. Take care, Tommy, and thanks very much.
Appreciate that, Tommy. Continued success for yourself.
Thank you, Tom. Bye-bye.